We are returning to the genius of Abraham. Last time we dealt with the story of Noah, the story of the flood, and the way in which the entire narrative can be seen as sort of a history of civilizations and Abraham's escape from the hydraulic societies of his world. Those are the Nile River, those of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, which were these structures that had very powerful authoritarians that would guide the corvée system, or the system where people would have to be forced into labor to build these very elaborate irrigation systems that would expand society. And those become the birthplace of all sorts of power structures, including the power structures of narrative and as well of the sword, right? But now you have agriculture, you have time to dedicate people both to being able to tell the story of the tower, so to speak, to be of singular words of the Tower of Babel. And you can also have people who are going to start with weapons. And what we see is that Abraham leaves all of that. His story is again a continuation in this farmers versus shepherds, which we laid out last time. But the idea here is that Abraham is the permanent shepherd. He is told, Lech lecha mi'artzecha mimoladetecha, go out from here, from your homeland, from the house of your father. And this story is a story where the rabbis understand this as Nimrod, the ruler of the Tower of Babel, forcing Abraham to buy into his idol worship, and Abraham refuses to buy into the idol worship, and Nimrod throws him into the fiery furnace, and Abraham miraculously escapes from the fiery furnace. The rabbis have their own very particular way of reading that out of a very particular verse. It is certainly an enormous read over very few actual sentences, but the power of it is again that Abraham is escaping from a very dogmatic place, a place which forces you to say the right words, to believe the right things. And those stories, those words, those idol worships, those are all part of the control system of this hydraulic society, of a authoritarian world in which you are going to be punished for not believing the central myth of the culture, which of course is there to keep everybody organized and working hard and afraid of the ruler. Now, when we come to Parshat Vayera, it's very interesting because we're going to see this tension between cities and shepherds, because really the cities grow out of the agriculture. The cities are the byproduct of these agricultural worlds. The first city was built by Cain, as we saw in our last episode. We see that Nimrod builds the Tower of Babel, the Migdal Bavel, that this is what happens when you come to the Tigris Euphrates River Valley and you have this farming society. You can build strong cities. And I've always thought it was very interesting. When Abraham negotiates with God before the destruction of Sodom, Abraham is going to say to God, God, how do you kill righteous and wicked all at the same time? Let me go and find 50 righteous men. So the words are are interesting. He says, Ulai yish chamishim tzadikim b'toch ha'ir. Perhaps there are 50 innocent within the city. Now, Samson Raphael Hirsch has a beautiful drasha on this, where he says that this is about the fact that Abraham is not a hermit who lives outside on some hilltop away from society. For Abraham, the true righteous is someone who is in the midst of his city, in the midst of his culture, trying to change the world. Beautiful. But the way we've been understanding this story, the genius of Abraham, is that he's the shepherd versus the city. And here, Abraham says, maybe there are people who have the right values in the city. And that city is going to be the city of Sodom. But we're going to find that Abraham is not allowed, can't find that, right? He says to God, far be it from you to do such a thing, to bring death upon the innocent as well as the guilty, so the innocent and guilty fare alike. Far be it from you, shall the judge of all earth deal justly. So here we have Abraham asking God, are you really just? But God proves to Abraham that, in fact, there aren't 50 people within the city. The city is that bad of a culture. And the idea of Abraham, it's this. When I reread this one verse, it is really fascinating. At the end of Parshat Lech Lecha, there's something called the covenant of the parts. And this is God's promise to Abraham that he will have the land of Israel. And it's God's promise to Abraham that his children will actually earn it by going down to Egypt and suffering, and the fourth generation will return. But he says, Bayom hahu karat Hashem et Abraham brit lemor. On that day, God cut a covenant with Abraham. The cutting is, by the way, that the sacrifices were cut in half, and there's a smoke that comes through. You can see this version of John Linnell's, where God's presence is passing through these parts. It's called the covenant of the parts, covenant of the pieces. Sometimes in Hebrew, it's called the Brit Ben Habitarim, and so God is establishing a covenant with him, and he says, to your children I will give this land. Minar Mitzrayim, from the Nile River, ad Nahar Gadol Nahar Parat, until the Euphrates River. Now, never do we really see that the Jews are promised from Egypt to the Euphrates. I think one way to understand this is that Abraham is being told, you are going to be between these two great societies, and your land is going to be neither the Nile, nor is it going to be the Euphrates. You are going to live in a very different way. Your covenant is to live differently than in the Nile and the Euphrates. Just as a footnote, the exact borders of the land of Israel are described slightly differently in other places. It's a whole subject unto itself, which hopefully we'll have the opportunity to deal with one day. But this is not that forum, because I want us to continue to see this genius of Abraham as the individual who was going to escape from the tyrannical societies of Egypt and of Babylon. Now, again, if you recall, Babylon is a tower in the heavens, and the story in Parshat Lech Lecha is the story of the 4 kings and the 5 kings. That the 4 kings come and they're essentially oppressing the 5 kings. The 5 kings are really kings of small cities. The 4 kings are the kings of the seat of empire of this Tigris-Euphrates River Valley. And we know this because it says, Vayhi bimei Amraphel melech Shinar. It is in the days of Amraphel, the king of Shinar. Shinar is the place where the Tower of Babel was built. The rabbis have a whole drasha, have a whole interpretation about that. This is really a reference to Nimrod, the very same individual who oppressed Abraham, who oppressed the Tower of Babel, who needs people to be dvarim achadim, to be a single society. What you're seeing here is a world that does not allow people to deviate from the party line. If you think about it, there is the famous interpretation Dostoevsky has. I think I referenced it last time, that the Tower of Babel is the ism that replaces God. It is the ism that everyone has to give lip service to. And so in the communist world, it was communism, and you couldn't say that communism wasn't working, and you couldn't speak out against the government, and you cannot, in these authoritarian worlds, there is one story, and there is no room for any dissension within the ranks. You only push the propaganda. That is the exact meaning of the words of the Tower of Babel, that they should be dvarim achadim, they should be of one word. And it is this culture that is the is the story of the 4 kings. Amraphel, the king of Shinar, that is the place of dvarim achadim, of the singular story, of the singular propaganda, from which you may not deviate in any fashion. Comes along Avraham, and he sees that Lot, his nephew, has been captured, and he's going to do a war against them. He's going to run a commando raid. And what's interesting about Abraham's commando raid, you can see in this particular etching, that this is Abraham returning the spoils of war to the king of Sodom. He's going out to meet Melchizedek, and he returns all the spoils of war. He doesn't want to take a single thing. He says, I'm not going to take a shoelace nor a strap. Nothing. Because Avram does not want to be associated with that world of force as the means to wealth. Now, one of the things we're also going to see in the Avram story is the difference of tents versus walls. In the beginning of Parshat Vayera, we're going to see Vayera elav Hashem be'elonei Mamre. God appears to him in the plains of Mamre. V'hu yoshev petach ohel kachom hayom. He's sitting at the tent in the heat of the day, right after the most particularistic ritual ever, the Brit Milah, right? The covenant, the sign that you're going to put on your body for generations to come, to say that you are part of the covenant of Abraham. Right as he is healing himself from that, his tent is open. He's looking for guests. He's actively looking for them, and they're not Abrahamic people. They are, as far as he knows, they are idol worshippers. So it's the open tent. It is the idea of charity and welcoming guests. Take that to contrast that with the story of Sodom. The story of Sodom is that you have these two angels who come in, and they are supposedly they are men, or they appear as men, and the people of Sodom want to violate them because guests are not allowed in Sodom. And what you see in Sodom is the word door is all over the place. Lot shuts the door. They blind the people on the other side of the door. Their doors, door. And Lot sits at the gate of the city, right, as if there are walls. Avram is open tent, and Sodom is closed walls. Here, again, we see the same sort of principle articulated in more broad terms. We see that Abraham is the person of tzedakah umishpat, of charity and justice, right? That is the line, for I have singled him out that he may instruct his children, his posterity, to keep the way of Hashem by doing what is just and right. Tzedakah, maybe just is translated as, could be translated as charity, or maybe charity is a way of achieving justice. But that's Avraham, is that giving sense of charity, right? On the other hand, when you get to the book of Yechezkel, it tells you what's the sin of Sodom. The sin of Sodom was her arrogance. Her daughters had plenty of bread and untroubled tranquility, yet she did not support the poor and the needy, right? So it's a closed wall kind of place. It's a closed wall, closed wallet. We see this idea translate through the culture of Sodom, through Lot's family. As the story proceeds, Sodom is destroyed. Mrs. Lot dies because she famously turns into a pillar of salt by looking back at Sodom. And Lot is saved together with his two daughters. His two daughters think they're the only people in the world, and they intoxicate their father, and in an act of incest, they bring up us, the two nations of Ammon and Moab. And I think that this idea of incest here, it is the epitome of insularity, right? That we don't give to other people, we take care of only ourselves. And the very pinnacle of that is going to be incest itself. This is, again, another one of the Italian Renaissance masters doing Lot and his daughters. Now, the opposite of that is Rebecca, right? Rebecca is the one who gives water to the stranger Eliezer. This is the family of Abraham. They're always going to be sharing with strangers. And what's interesting is when we get to the book of Devarim, we find no Ammonite or Moabite shall be admitted into the congregation of God. Sorry, I'm going to go back up. They're not invited into the congregation of God. The reason they're not invited into the congregation of God is because Asher lo kidmu etchem belechem u'mayim. They didn't offer you bread and water on your journey when you left Egypt. Culturally, the offsprings of Lot, his daughters and their incestuous relationships, are Ammon and Moab. And those two relationships become insular to the end. They are not allowed to convert into Judaism, at least in the first generation, because they did not meet you with food and water on your journey. This idea of these insular city societies are corrosive to the spirit of Abraham, who is a shepherd with open and broad tents, who sees giving and a much freer kind of world as opposed to an insular way of being. To me, this is a very interesting aspect of the story of Abraham and his genius, how he was very different from the rest of the world around him. And as we continue the stories of the Parshiot, we're going to look and see how this culture, this unique feature of Abraham's behavior, is going to stand in contrast through the generations to the world around him.